As we've seen over the last over a week and more, this has been a latest round of escalation and more escalation. And yet, at some point, and I think we're close to that, there's this question mark, both in Washington but also in Tehran, that how long more can you continue to escalate before things get out of control? They might decide actually it's to their benefit to let things get out of control, so for return to full-on war. Or they might take a step back from the brink, as we've seen in the past. And there are some signs that suggest that might be underway. I see a senior Iranian official visiting Islamabad soon. I am assuming that sending messages back to Washington is part of his mission. We've heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying diplomacy is not dead. It's hard to predict where this is going to go. But right now, we basically have two main options in front of us: more escalation, more damage, more death, or at least a break in the fighting, a ceasefire. And again, some of the mediators, particularly the Qataris, are talking about a 10-day ceasefire. If that can be achieved, that might just give diplomacy a chance to see if it can work something out. Look, both sides claim that they're the innocent party here. Iran says they didn't start this, that the Americans attacked them first. The Americans will tell you that the Iranians started it by firing at ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians will say they did that because the Americans were going against the memorandum of understanding that was signed up 17th of June, and on and on and on. So we can continue this, who is to be blamed for this. Fundamentally, you have a situation where there's zero political trust. Neither side trusts the other one. So much is at stake for the whole region. I mean, it's not just Iran that's suffering. It's just not American casualties. A lot of the Gulf right now is in a very precarious situation. So much of infrastructure could be potentially the targets in the next rounds if this conflict continues. So again, one can engage in this blame game, which is fine, and countries do that at a moment of conflict. But end of the day, it is fundamentally a lose-lose equation for both the US and Iran. They don't have to love one another to see that, to go back and see if they can come up with a ceasefire. But again, it's really important to point out, it's a ceasefire. It's not going to resolve their differences. They still have to have issues about, what would be the future of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's nuclear program, so on. But the best we can hope for is a ceasefire, to bring back the parties, to have another go at the diplomatic process. It won't be easy, but it's probably, in the minds of many, the better alternative to a full-fledged war. Couple of things. Look, the Saudis really don't want to go back to war with the Houthis. This ceasefire that they have had with the Houthis for about 4 years now, it's fragile, has always been fragile, but it's preferred over the return of the conflict, which might include scenarios as you just laid out. Houthi attacks on, Saudi infrastructure, whether it's energy assets or otherwise. So if the Saudis can help it, they want to keep the peace. Is the situation in Yemen entirely linked to what's going on between US and Iran? That's a slightly different question. I don't really think we have much clarity there. I think it's a simplification to say that Tehran can just simply ask the Houthis to enter the war on their side. The Houthis don't operate like that. They have their own agency. They're not Iranian stooges as such. But it might be a case where their interests and that of the Islamic Republic of Iran overlap, and they decide that, if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz and we close the al-Mandab, we meaning the Houthis, then that certainly would get the attention of the United States and all its regional partners. That's not a bad calculation on their part, because what we have seen is the world really does react to the traffic out of the Strait of Hormuz and through the al-Mandab. We've seen it repeatedly over the last few years. So it's a calculation they might make, but obviously that would just get the United States that much more fired up and partners to maybe re-engage in a larger military conflict that would be more devastating for the Iranians, for the Houthis. And the question then remains, will Iran and the Houthis want to risk that? As of right now, I would guess they don't. As of right now, I think they're using the sort of threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz or the Bab al-Mandab as essentially a bargaining chip to sort of flex muscle to say you cannot militarily marginalize us if you are the United States. Come back and see if you can give us something that could result in some kind of a deal. That's, I think, their position if you're sitting in Tehran or if you're in the Houthi movement today. We're in a different place right now than we were a few years ago. Last time the Houthis closed the Strait of, or the Bab al-Mandab in support of the Palestinians after October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel. We're in a slightly different place just because the Trump administration has not really put much effort in building coalitions. We know the story of President Trump and NATO. A lot of mistrust on the part of this American administration when it comes to NATO as willing partners who are able to, as they use the word here, burden share. So coalition building is something you would need before you can start seeing a scenario where countries from, whether it's the United Kingdom or the other European countries would start thinking of joining the war effort, if you will. I don't see any signs of it. I think a lot of political expressions of support for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz or making sure Bab al-Mandab doesn't get closed down. But expression of political support is not the same thing as these Europeans are ready to send off their navies to the region, because it's a question of capacity, capability, and B, as I said earlier, politically, they've never really been happy with the way the Trump administration has handled the Iran war. And again, that gives them reason to pause before they decide to perhaps get involved more deeply on the side of the US against Iran or the Houthis for that matter. I don't think President Trump wants to start a war in the Middle East against Iran or anybody that will last the remainder of his presidency. That's not what he came to office for. Now, he's emotionally in a place where he wants to punish the Iranians. He wants them to give to Washington what Washington is demanding, but diplomatically, I think he'll be very reluctant to want to go to an open-ended conflict, because that essentially turns him into a George W. Bush, exactly one of his predecessors that he made fun of. So for Trump to do that, it wouldn't be something that he'll be taking very lightly. Now, in terms of alternative ways to get the oil and the gas out of the Persian Gulf region to world markets, that's obviously something that everybody's thinking about right now, whether you're in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, elsewhere. But it's not something that you can do in a quick order. It will take a long time and a lot of effort. And even if you do that, you still have an Iran capable of blowing up pipelines. Just because it's in Syria doesn't mean the Iranian missile or drone can't blow it up. So your problem still is Iran with the capacity to be a spoiler for a long time to come. We see that in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are successfully hitting targets in Siberia, way away from the war front. Exactly the same scenario will be happening with Iran. So it's not so much about a question of how do I build pipelines to go around the Strait of Hormuz. It's geography. Iran is a large country. All of these countries and anything they do in terms of new pipelines and new facilities, new ports, all of them, unless you solve this issue politically or the regime in Tehran is toppled, Iran will be able to still pose a serious danger to all these assets, the ones that exist right now and the future ones that will be built. Yeah, one of the biggest problems here is that both sides want to declare victory. It's not just true for Trump, it's also true for the Iranian regime. They want to be declared the victors here. They want to make a point, they essentially want to humiliate Trump. And that is, in my estimation, the wrong way of looking at it. This is an Iranian regime that has to deal with not just Trump, but its own people. It is a highly unpopular Islamist regime that has a track record that frankly is dismal. If you're an average Iranian today, you look at the last 47 years and you say, what have you actually done to make life better for us here in Iran? And the regime will fail to answer in a convincing way. So, if you are the Islamic Republic, one way where you could get out of this war is to cut a deal with Trump administration. That includes not insisting on Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It requires something where Iran symbolically is considered, together with Oman, as the two countries that actually share the territorial waters that makes up the Strait of Hormuz. That is plausible, that's legally very easy to sell, but that doesn't mean you can impose fees on trafficking. So essentially we go back to where we were before this war began, with a slight adjustment in the sense that in future wars, Iran or Oman can turn to the strait as a point of leverage. I think the world can live with that. I think Donald Trump can live with that because he cares about right now. He cares about the price of gas right now. He cares about inflation in America right now. He doesn't care about any permanent adjustment to the Strait of Hormuz in terms of its legal status going forward. That's not his headache. He'll be out of the White House in 2.5 years. So if the Iranians can do that, and the Americans can give them something in return, that would be sanctions relief and all the rest of it. It'll be a transactional deal. You don't have to reopen embassies in one another's capitals, but you just go back to before where you were 28th of February. Then this Islamic Republic of Iran really needs to perhaps consider taking this as a moment to address the many, many grievances, legitimate grievances of its own people. And that is the big fight they have. It's not so much to Trump. It's the people of Iran. That is where the anger is. That's where you can expect people back in the streets and the regime having to, either kill, as they did back in January, thousands of people to stay in power, or actually try and listen to their own people and change their policies that would much more better, reflect the wishes of the Iranian people. I think nobody can question if there were free elections tomorrow in Iran, if you had a referendum, should this regime stay in power or go? I think vast majority of Iranians, a clear majority, would vote against this regime. But that doesn't mean the United States or Israel, for that matter, had a clear-cut plan how to bring the regime down. I don't think they ever did. I still don't think they do. It's not an easy thing to do. This is an entrenched system that has been in power for about half a century. You don't just topple it. This is not Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, or even Saddam Hussein's Iraq, or Hafez al-Assad's Syria. This is a very different system. And it takes time, it takes patience, it takes political, military, and other investment if you want regime change. There are no signs that those investments are being made. So when President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu went to war with Iran in February, they had this hope that the regime was a house of cards will collapse. It didn't happen. And we haven't seen any evidence to suggest that I've actually gone back and created a whole new, much more credible strategy to bring the regime down. So what you have right now is tit for tat. U.S. strikes them, the Iranians strike back in kind. It's not going to really take us anywhere positive going forward. So the people of Iran, as I said, will not change their mind on the Islamic Republic and would want to have a regime change because that's what they want. And I don't think they should expect any help really from the Trump administration. And that is really the long-term challenge for the Islamic Republic, how it deals with the grievances of its own people. It shouldn't really worry too much about regime change being forced on Iran from outside, certainly not from the Trump administration. Again, don't see any evidence that they have anything in the pipelines that suggests that's what they want.